Welcome to my view from the piano bench. We do this every Wednesday evening at 7 p.m. here on my Joe Holt's Notes YouTube channel, along with Piano for My Friends every Thursday evening. So, a unique look into my unique brain, but more lately, just reflecting on experiences, and hopefully in a way that's relatable, and maybe you can take something from it, whatever you do with it, and whatever you do in general. So, not just like lessons for musicians, but maybe me sharing life lessons from here, which is pretty much where I learn everything, or a lot of things. Thank you to those of you who support and encourage me via the links you'll find on the support page of my website. You'll see a link to that page in the video description. And while you're there, poke around. If you choose to take a look at the Patreon, which is really geared for those of you who watch this with some regularity. It's a simple kind of take on a tip jar with some exclusive content that you'll receive from me. And I'm grateful, in any case, I'm grateful that you're here. So, what have I titled today? I should know, I wrote it, but here it is. The Post-Game Show. Now, the post-game show is a term I coined for the, I don't want to say event or the circumstances, or just the energy that can occur after a gig. There is a lot of energy in a show. And of course, it's different from musician to musician, but I think every musician would say it's an expending of energy. And in my case, a lot of emotional energy. Because this is where it comes from. It comes from the feeling place more than the thinking place. Of course, they join together, but it is draining, it's taxing, and it's physically demanding. You know, I sometimes say that a long session of the piano is kind of like an aerobic workout. Not entirely, but then not entirely not either. And that energy, needs some place to go. So often after a show, I can think of the mainstay. Of course, the mainstay is a good example to use over the last few years, but I've been doing this for since I could drive a car and get myself to gigs. So for a good number of decades at this point. And you know that after a gig, there's this, maybe you want to collapse, but you also just have to run around the block, or I do, and there's just a lot that you carry with you. And like I say, it needs some place to go. What I will often do at the mainstay is go down to the little beach in Rock Hall. And occasionally, those of you who follow me on Facebook, I have not succumbed to Instagram yet. I've never ever looked at Instagram except for the Instagram posts that show up on Facebook. Because I'm just this, old guy who demographically fits into Facebook, and so are most of the people who follow me. You're not young TikTokers, or whatever you call it, right? But if you do follow me on Facebook, then you'll see those pictures from the beach in mostly Rehoboth these days, because I'm not really gigging in Jersey that much if I'm down there. But then after like a mainstay show or something else in Rock Hall, it could be from that little beach on the Chesapeake Bay in Rock Hall. It's a go-to for me. And it's just a little beach, pacing around the beach basically means, walking a few feet one way, a few feet the next, and I can still do that for an hour, potentially. And it has to go somewhere. And when you're playing solo, it's an additional kind of circumstance. I was going to say challenge. I don't know what the word is, but it's it can actually be kind of lonely because you're going from being in the middle of all this energy that's a connection between people, right? And then everybody leaves and you're by yourself. And you drive home by yourself. And if you're like me, you live by yourself. Yeah. And, you know, that's a circumstance that kind of needs a little management, right? So let's see if anybody recalls this old Irving Berlin tune that I've recently discovered again, and from the 1920s. Yeah, an old Irving Berlin song called All Alone, which some people play in 4. 4/4, that is 4 beats measured 2, 3. But that's a little more upbeat than maybe the lyrical angst of the song. Although there's other things going on in the song too, but yeah, nice waltz, which is how it's written, which is a whole nother subject. And if I'm taking a detour, that's probably, well, it's a paradox. It's a good thing and a bad thing. I might forget what I'm supposed to be talking about, but at least my brain is engaged, right? So a lot of what musicians will do in my camp is change up the rhythm of a song, the underlying feel. It's like if you got sheet music for Fly Me to the Moon, which everybody associates with Frank Sinatra, you know, and the swinging. You're going to find it's written in 3/4. It's written as a waltz in its initial form. I like to play it that way. So, Matt the Knife, in its original Mackie Messer form, I believe was also in 3. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but I'm wrong about a lot of things. And in the end, mostly doesn't matter. So, all alone. Uh, and it's that energy that you carry with you that wants to go someplace, because music is uh, typically a collaborative effort. And it's really challenging when you are connected to that larger piece, which I believe I am, and you do it by yourself, and you perform solo, uh, because you have that connection, and it's kind of just like to the cosmos at that point, but or to the larger space, which is actually what you want. But you want to have people around too to talk about it with. Now, not everybody is a contemplative, including musicians, and some can compartmentalize well, and they pretty much move on immediately. They don't want to think about the gig when it's over, and they just go on. But others, like myself, are prone to ponder, and I think it has to do with that introvert extrovert dichotomy. Where someone who would be classified as an introvert, which doesn't mean they're quiet all the time. We're talking about just the internal landscape. The introvert recharges when alone and expends energy when in a social environment, and the extrovert is the other way around. So yeah, you do want to be alone, but maybe I'm talking in circles. Everything's a balance, and sometimes the balance gets off. And music is something to continually contemplate on, but then discuss like, well, what happened, and what could we do better there, and wasn't this cool, and here's an idea for next time, and I never thought of that, and did you see that person out in the audience, and all that stuff. And there are some shows, and I'm going to look ahead a little bit in this hour, like the one we had at the Mainstay this past Friday night, the first Friday with Joe Holt, a tribute to Billy Penberger, that had tons of energy, and just that momentum just kept going, that fullness, that need to embrace, because it's embracing us and we're embracing it, right? song is ended, but the melody lingers on. Not a tune I've actually ever played. Simple enough tune, although I can befuddle in the most simple of simplicity, but one that just seemed really relevant. So I looked it up so I could play it, because that's kind of what this is in, a slightly different way than the lyrics intended. But that's good songwriting too. Is having a discussion with a very good songwriter friend about this, where the song itself may come from some personal place, but the magic of it is that it doesn't need the personal context or private even context to relate to somebody else or to relate in another circumstance. And that's a cool thing about this. So a particular band leader back in the day, or a day, or some day back there, had a habit of making a phone call after a gig while driving home. And it would be to discuss the gig. And if you're actually driving by yourself and you have a gig, and then somebody on the gig calls you and you talk about the gig for however long you're driving home, that's, to me, a welcome thing. And again, to somebody who's maybe less of a contemplative, it's an annoying thing. But a lot of us fall into the, enjoying, if not wanting, the post-game show kind of thing. And that was a circumstance that I labeled later the post-game show. And it kind of is, because those, those special moments, live on. And there are different manifestations of how the music carries on, because it's not just with musicians, it's with the audience too. And when you have a show, now maybe, let's go back, this particular band leader, it was kind of like an agency where it primarily played high-end events, corporate events, and wedding receptions where this kind of music that they did was appropriate and such. And then there's a little bit less, or a lot less, of the audience interaction thing, because you're in a different role and different expectations. But particularly when you're in a concert environment and the audience is as engaged as you are, and that's really what you're looking for. Or my phrase that you've heard me say, is you take a lasso and you throw it around the room, and then everyone around in the room is in the same space with you. And that's what you're shooting for all the time, right? And when that happens, you could have a post-game conversation with audience members too, and it happens, and it's happened to me in different circumstances in interesting ways. I remember seeing an interview with an opera singer who had said something like, and there's been different versions of this, so you've heard this before in some way, I'm sure, that when the concert's over and everyone goes home, people don't remember what I sang for them, but they'll remember how it made them feel. And that's what this is all about, right? Feelings, nothing more than feeling. Yeah, that's funny. That song from like 1973 or something, it was like big for 5 minutes, and then it was pretty much ignored or annoying after that. And the song just eventually like totally went away, and nobody really wanted to play. I know that's harsh. I don't think the song got a lot of traction with musicians for a long time. Let's put it like that. It's not one of the songs that is in that wonderful library of tunes from the 70s that people still do all the time. In fact, 2017, I'm down in Florida to do a concert, and the director of the series took me out afterward. And of course, we're down in Florida, so it's a particular older demographic, which I didn't really think about in this context until we got to this restaurant. And there's this piano player playing, and it's nice, and I think he's singing. Maybe he's not. I don't know. But the guy who's taking me he was also a church music director, and he was directing heading this concert series, right? And he says something about, I guess you'd want to tell him a thing or two. I said, actually, no. I'm going to appreciate what he's doing. I'm going to enjoy being a civilian, something like that. And we're sitting, way far away from it, but right under a speaker, And when he started playing Feelings, I think I laughed for 5 minutes because I realized I hadn't heard that song for like 25 years or more. It's like, that song still exists and somebody still plays it. Now, I know that people might say that about, stylistically the music I play, but this is a different category thing, and I think you get it. It was so amusing. Maybe not to you, but it was amusing to me. So I think I finally gotten myself slightly sidetracked. Yes. So the so what I'm going to do is, oh yes, you remember how it made them feel, right? And at this point, I have written down a tune that if I wanted to, I could play. I'm not going to play it. I'm going to name it. It's an Irving Berlin tune called Remember. I'll play one chorus. Last night of that song, you promised that you'd forget me not, but you forgot to remember. Different context, but anyway. So an example of how in my experience, how the conversation and the energy carries on, not just among musicians, but among audience members, is that show that you've heard me talk about if you've watched these streams occasionally, or a series of shows of a big fundraising event that happened for 15 years here in Chestertown that ended 2 years ago. It actually ended a week before the pandemic started, but it was planned to be the final show of the Women Helping Women series. And it was in March of 2020, 15th anniversary. We're going to put a bow on it. And it's, it's good to know when to stop something when it still has all that positive energy and you want it to continue, but you know the time's kind of run out on it. And the next week we were in the lockdown. We'll look back on that. Speaking of post-game shows, lots with regard to that. But that show in Chestertown was a big event, a big cultural event. The theater in town would sell out sometimes weeks ahead, and everybody would anticipate it. And all the local performers, and there were often like 20 of them on stage, and I would accompany most of them. And they were all in it for the cause and for the love. And this community, this area is just wonderful in supporting its people and its artists and its causes. And so it was just this big thing. And when we had enough performers that we couldn't handle 2 songs anymore, everybody did one. And everybody went through all of the rigmarole, including rehearsals and a few group things we would put together to do that one song. And that one song was a showcase for that person ultimately, and typically, they weren't doing it to showcase themselves, but of course you always have that in mind. You're going to put your best thing out there, and it's going to be, part of the theme. And, there's this whole yay team and yay me thing that works together. And I kind of likened it to a version of America's Got Talent-ish for Chestertown, not in the judging sense, but in the sense that everybody is just completely focused on that, and then the town will talk about it for weeks afterward. And then there'll be a few performances that rise to the top that everybody talks about. And I don't walk through town nearly as much. Those of you who are local to me, do know and may remember when, for a few years, every morning I'd be up early. I lived about a mile on the other side of the bridge. I'd walk over the bridge into town, and every morning I'd be around town. And so, in a small pond area like this, you can't hide. So I gave up trying, and you talk to people, and pretty much everybody you're going to eventually see, right? And so I would hear all of this feedback and all this wonderful energy. And if they're talking about it to me, and even weeks later, imagine how they're talking about it amongst themselves. And the theater in Chestertown, it's a really nice sized theater for a small town, 260 seats. That thing would be full. So you have these 260 people who are just, and the energy just multiplies itself. And so, like it or not, you're in that small town, people are going to talk about you, right? So you kind of want it to be a good circumstance, and you want it to be your best effort, right? please don't talk about me when I'm gone. But you know, we can't help ourselves, can we? So, at the mainstay, coming back to that, and having the wonderful circumstance of, you know, for years, being able to put on a show every week, oftentimes, you know, I'd be back at the mainstay next week, and conversation still about the show the week before, or about a show a week before that, or about a show 3 months before that, or all of them concurrently. Which, now that I think about it, this is interesting, right? You know, sometimes when you hear yourself talk, it actually informs you. So the mainstay is known, it's the label that they put on themselves, but it's extremely true. The home of musical magic, right? And you know, I think part of that magic is just that you come back to that same spot. And that spot, which is a beautiful, wonderful, magical spot to make music, you know, captures and holds that energy, you know. And the mainstay is just this accumulation of post game and post game and post game. You know, it's like the stadium where all these wonderful things happen. And yeah, so part of that musical magic is just the recurring things that happen on the stage so frequently there, right? So Becky Bird, who's the widow of great jazz guitarist Charlie Bird, who was very instrumental in the beginnings of the mainstay in bringing in jazz musicians and connecting the jazz musician community to the mainstay, and therefore connecting the mainstay to jazz and building a jazz audience historically at the mainstay. Becky is still involved. She was our board president for a long time, and she's taken more of a back seat, but she still runs the bar and will often be found behind the bar. So I would see her most Monday nights. And Becky would be a really good barometer of that energy, because the first thing she'd say was, Joe, you know, that show, you know, and, or she'd say it right afterward, or she, you know, and that she was a barometer to me of what shows were extra special, because she would be talking about them for months later, and she'd be, if I was talking to nobody else, I was talking to Becky, right? And one of the people she really latched onto, who she did not stop talking about, and I hate to, you know, make a statement this, okay, I'm going to say it. The person that she latched onto the most, that just really stuck with her, is so special. But I'm not going to pin that on her, because I know there are a lot of people special to Becky. But in my experience with Becky, the show she kept coming back to was when I had Sharon Sable. Oh my, could she not wait for Sharon to come back? Oh my goodness. And that first time, and Sharon is, of course, who I'm doing this Blossom Dearie tribute project with, and who we're doing a lot of performing together now. And I'm going to play a tune from that first show, which is also, it was the first time I performed with Sharon. She came with her husband, Sean Kesani. But we did a duo version of Tea for Two, unknown to me the way Blossom Dearie did it, which was incredibly slow. It's funny with that Tea for Two. I really wasn't aware too much of Blossom Dearie. Our conversation happened later, where Sharon proposed me accompanying her for that. But there were three things about that Tea for Two. One, I didn't realize Tea for Two had a verse, which I'm not going to play now. And D flat, really? All right. And then it was incredibly slow. It was like the Neil Hefti Count Basie Little Darlin' thing that I can never play slow enough. Wait a minute. Ah, man, my ear's wrong. Oh, and of course, coming from me, who speeds up everything, you know, yeah, iconic Basie thing. Blossom Deary approached T for Two the same way, with the same circumstance where, Neil Hefti did not write Little Darling as a slow tune. Basie did it as a ridiculously slow, and Blossom Deary. Right? And yeah. But I just come back to T for Two because that was the tune that kind of got things started with Sharon and I. But I'm not going to play it like that. In fact, I heard a great version. Oh my goodness. I imagine that, most of you are aware of and perhaps watch weekly Emmett Cohen's live streams, which are now going to be just once a month from his apartment, which I think was a negotiation with his landlord. But it was amazing it went on this long. But also, he's not home a lot of Monday nights anymore. But he still puts out, videos every Monday night of like streams from Paris or whatever. And I think that was where this was from. And it was this version of T for Two. Oh my goodness! And he broke into that whole Latin field that a lot of us guys would do back in the day, back when big bands were still a thing, like 20, 30 years ago. And then you would have your gig and someone would want a cha-cha. And in this case with the Madiri Band, which is typically the band I played with, and they were pretty much the busiest big band in that whole area, and they played a lot. There'd be weeks we played, 5 nights a week. Not all the time, but yeah. So people want a cha-cha. We didn't do a band arrangement. We just had the small group thing, and you get the horn players rest their chops. You just have one sax player in the rhythm section. You do T for Two with a cha-cha, right? Eventually I get those track with the cha-cha. what it's worth. I played it. So uh, this topic is a little bit related to a topic I had some weeks ago that I call "Get a Job." Where most people, I think it's fair to say most, come from a more linear perspective and have more of an ability to compartmentalize, and it's like, well, what do you do for a job? Well, I live this 24/7. But what do you do for a job? Well, I get paid for when I do this, but what do you do for a job? And you can't get past, or that person can't get past the idea that there's this, category or compartment of something that you do, so that you can get paid, and then you walk away from it, and then you do the rest of your life, as opposed to something that is your life, yeah. And generally, here's what I wrote here. Generally, the people who get it the least, or who are the most annoying, are non-musicians. Well, true. But not everybody can just pick up and put down, especially if you're engaged with something that you carry with you in your heart, right? And again, and this is why I wrote it to say it down here, but I've been saying it, I think, throughout this stream here. And music isn't meant to be carried alone, because it's a connection to something bigger and outside of ourselves. So that First Friday show with the Mainstay, which inspired me doing this, although I haven't talked about it, really generated so much emotional energy and post-game discussion, and is still being talked about. And if you are so inclined, the Mainstay live streams most of their programming and all of my First Friday shows. So you can go to the Mainstay live streams YouTube channel, and you'll see it. If you're watching this close to the time that it runs, that I recorded it, it'll be right at the top. But even if you see this years later, just go down to roughly this date and look for First Friday with Joe Holt, Billy Penberger, and watch the show, and you'll get the context, especially in the second half, and it's just really, really lovely. And there's one tune that I like to play of Billy's, just a simple tune that I started the second half with, and I'm going to just play it, touch it here. Oh! So here's something interesting I thought of when I was playing that. So if you watch a live stream, it just starts the second half, and one little thing that you want to know when watching those videos is there's a little hold screen for a few minutes in the beginning. You just scroll past that, and then there's a little hold screen for the intermission. You scroll past that. And the emotional energy is something that the musicians connect to, and of course by intermission, there was all this emotional energy, which there was among the band members before anybody came in. So where I was able to go with it was like way different, really, than this. This is, how should I say, playing for all of this hour. It's kind of more vanilla, it's just, so sometimes you're in one space, sometimes you're in another, And also, too, I try to prioritize being in a position to speak intelligently, which is not always a given with me. And sometimes the playing can suffer a little bit. So compare this to that, and there's a sense of, what the emotional burden is for musicians. That's not what I meant to say. So what I want to do in closing, and hopefully I have it queued up here, if that's the right word, and doesn't look like I do, but I can find it quickly, except that my tablet is incredibly slow, and it's going to make me log into my email again. So I do everything the around the barn way, for better or for worse. And yes, it's going to make me even go to the folder again. I had it all set up, and it is right here. So I'm taking a liberty here, and yeah, I won't say anymore. I'm taking a liberty, and I want to read to you the email blast that Matt Melnick, who's our main stage director now, put out a couple of days after the show. And I'm reading it because if you're not on the mainstay email list, you're not going to come across this. And I think this is a very fine depiction of the emotional energy that we performers, including Matt, he's a performer, carry. And it's a similar emotional energy that you're going to put to being responsible for booking programs, and managing programs and all of that, which Matt depicts here. So let's see if this resonates. And I'm going to end with this, and it's a little bit lengthy, but I think you'll appreciate it. Those of us who attended Friday night's First Friday with Joe Holt program were treated to an exceptional, if not downright euphoric evening of great music and shared exuberance at the mainstay. The binding stitch for this assembled for the occasion 6-piece band was the music of Billy Penberger. He was a much-loved musician in the Wilmington area who passed away just a few years ago after an impressive career as a singer-songwriter and local band leader. Two of the players, the fantastic guitarist Nick Bucci and piano player Steve Prentice, were members of Berger's band in its heyday. They shared the stage with Sharon Sable and Kelly Vale, adeptly taking turns on lead vocals as well as joining forces on backup vocals, and Ray Anthony keeping the band's pulse on drums. Joe Holt introduced his left hand only, Jocko, as the group's bass player, nicely accomplished on a digital keyboard. The bandmates had been discussing this project for months, but stunningly had not shared a practice stage to rehearse their selections until the afternoon of the performance. As such, this band's music was new to everyone in the room. What a recipe. The main stage was nearly full. There were many familiar faces, but also many first-time visitors, some of them wearing Billy Penberger t-shirts. It's a good feeling to introduce the mainstay to newcomers. We sent them home with a promise to reconvene these fine players next year so that we could enjoy more of this man's passionate music entrusted in these talented hands. I went to bed as soon as I got home, further confirmation that great fun takes its toll as much as hard work. I had a vivid dream that night. I found myself in a new Olympic event, underwater swimming. The dream started with me diving underwater and swimming as hard and as fast as I could towards a small island ahead where I was only then permitted to surface briefly before jumping back in and racing to the next island. There were people standing about on this island, apparently there to cheer me on. They all had a champagne flute in their hands. It sure looked like fun, but I only had time to catch my breath and dive underwater again. I have no idea how many more times they would be allowed to surface or whether there was a finish line. I don't need a soothsayer to interpret this. These island cheerleaders are the mainstay audiences. They are there to celebrate and offer their encouragement as a gesture of gratitude for one outstanding show after another. What they are unable to fathom is how breathtaking an effort it can be under the surface between islands, scheduling the right acts, promoting the heck out of them, and nervously pinning our hopes on enough people showing up on the island to inspire you to jump back in toward the next leg of the journey. The goal is to share the unique thrill of the moment with those gathered. The prize is getting their permission to do it all over again. Woo! And that last paragraph is its own thing, and boy, is it right in the bullseye of things I understand and talk about really what it means to work for me. Speaking of work, get a job. I have one, thank you very much. So hopefully that means something to you and resonates, and hopefully I made sense and that the music was acceptable, and thank you so much for being here. Join me tomorrow for Piano for My Friends, and I hope to see you soon. Keep in touch.